So if it wasn't for the sprint races, McLaren and Aston Martin would have tied for the season.
And would we have had that much of a battle between Mercedes and Ferrari at the end?
I don't know. We're going to have to look into this a little bit more.
Let's dive in.
Welcome to Turn 1, a Formula One podcast. Now entering the grid. Here are your hosts, Thomas and Jeremiah.
Welcome back to another episode of Turn 1 Podcast with your host, Jeremiah.
And Thomas.
We're going to go and take a look at the sprint races for the 2023 season. We wanted to go over what the implications were on the championships, what we thought of them. It's a very controversial topic. A lot of people hate them. Some people like them. Maybe it's the format that needs to change. I don't know. We're going to take a look and find out what we can mess around on this thing with.
Yeah, so we're going to start with the big topic, which was what impact they had on 2023. Because when you look at the sprint races, we'll dive into like the point structure and weekend structure and our general thoughts. But let's start, like I said, with the heavy hitter. There's 8 points up for grab 6 times in 2023, up to 8 points. And it's weird because it's the only time that they scale linearly, like down. It goes, 8, 7, 6. In every other race, it's 25, 18, 15. So you're talking about huge points implications with these. And like we mentioned in the open, the difference in the final race of the year, in the final standings, you had Mercedes securing second in the constructors by 3 points, and you had McLaren beating Aston Martin by 22 points. Okay, the Mercedes-Ferrari, that's a valid battle. Now you're asking yourselves, well, okay, McLaren, Aston Martin, 22 points, that's a lot. That would be a whole nother race. Not when you add in 6 sprint races at 8 points apiece. Let's look at these numbers individually, and then I know that you've got some hot takes on this. I'm going to start with the lesser of the battles, which was the McLaren-Aston Martin. Across the 6 sprint races, Aston Martin secured 14 points. Okay, a decent little haul.
Right.
McLaren secured 36. Can you do the math real quick there? What's the difference?
24?
No, 22.
Cut that.
I'm not cutting that.
No.
He can't do the math. Okay.
No.
It's 22. And then they were separated again by 22 points, where McLaren had 302 and Aston Martin had 280. So you take out the sprint races, it's tied at the end of the year.
Pretty much.
Do you know how big that is for Aston Martin?
I mean, at the end of the day, whenever you're looking at stuff like this, it's that those kind of races, those points matter more than anything. And which is funny because whenever we kind of look at the sprint races, you almost watch them half, like one eye on them and one eye somewhere else, or just maybe your eyes are closed, you're just listening to it. You don't really care. And you have no idea that it's going to have this level of implications at the end of the season when you know that they could have gone into that last race of the season at a dead tie.
And I'd be curious to know, so let us know in the comments, do you watch the sprints with as much enthusiasm as you might qualifying? Like, I know we're really into qualifying. We love it. We think it's a battle. The sprints, like Jeremiah mentioned, I'll watch them, because it's Formula One. But at the same time, I still feel like they shouldn't really be there, and I guess we'll get into that. But again, so McLaren had 36 points, Aston 14, 22 points. You take out all the sprints, and you have a dead heat at the end of the season. Again, financially, that has a big impact. Marketing-wise, that has a big impact. If you're Lawrence Stroll over there at Aston Martin, you want to finish where McLaren is right now. That would be huge for Aston Martin to make that big of a step up in 1 year. Let's look at the bigger battle. You have Mercedes at 409 points across the season and Ferrari at 406. Now, this is where it gets a little bit odd because in the sprint races, Ferrari finished with 43 points to Mercedes 35 points. So the sprint races actually brought Ferrari back into the fight.
Right. So if you were to take those out completely, you're looking at a gap that's so big that when it comes down to the Abu Dhabi race, there's really not a chance of Ferrari getting that second place spot at all. But when you factor in that 8-point difference that Ferrari had over Mercedes in the sprint races, you can kind of look at Abu Dhabi and think, wait a minute.
It's a
we
race.
have a battle going on, man.
And again, it was separated by 3 points. And it did come down to the last couple of laps, right? With Charles trying to push to the end and trying to make up those points. All that to say, if you take out the sprint races, it's kind of null and void. So let's talk a little bit about what our thoughts are. I'm going to skip ahead in our outline a little bit. You have 2 different sides of this argument happening in 2023 alone. You have the McLaren Aston Martin conversation where the sprints really kind of hurt one team. They hurt Aston. And then you have the Mercedes Ferrari conversation where the sprints really helped Ferrari get back into the fight.
Right.
What are your thoughts?
In terms of the application of the point structure? Or?
Just how the sprints impact the race. Is it a positive or negative impact, or is it team dependent on whatever year, however the sprints impact them?
As far as the sprint races go, the way that they impact, obviously in terms of how they impacted the 2023 standings in both the drivers and the constructors, it played a big part. I mean, it allowed it allowed Leclerc to get into the fight with Alonso for that 4th place battle in the driver standings. It allowed for all these different people to kind of make up where they might not have been doing so well in the feature races. But at the same time, as far as how it's perceived, it's not perceived very well. It's not something that we like to watch just because of the fact that, I mean, you can only do so many overtakes in a race that's significantly less.
Third distance, right?
I can't remember what the exact distance percentage-wise is, but the fact that it is such a dramatically less amount than an actual feature race, it's almost like you can't get the momentum going to get enough overtaking done to actually have it matter. But at the same time, we do see guys like at the Haas and the Williams that might start in a really good spot for the sprint race, but then they do dramatically fall back and they're not able to hold on to those spots maybe that well. So it's kind of like, also you got to look at the fact that it's kind of a pre-show to exactly what you're going to see in the feature race. So he looked fast. He was making a lot of overtakes. Add another 50 laps and I'll bet you he gets more done. I mean, it kind of takes away from what we might see in the feature race itself.
I did appreciate this year that it wasn't Max Verstappen running away with every single sprint race.
We saw Oscar Piastri win one.
We saw Piastri. We saw Perez. You saw a couple others mixed in there. So it was a precursor to the race, but at the same time, I think the teams had different approaches to the sprints in the race. Maybe they had a different approach to Parc Ferme. I will say that in general, I think the sprints were an effort to bring in more attention and build up more hype. My argument to that is I don't know if Formula One needs that.
Sure.
This isn't, so again, a couple of years back, NASCAR introduced stage racing and the NASCAR introduced the playoffs, and that's because their TV and viewership and attendance was falling off of a cliff, right? And so they had to kind of mix it up and change things, try to get more viewers in, try to get more marketing opportunities, try to have more drivers winning things so that their fan bases were kept content. But in Formula One, you're at an all-time high and it grows every single year. Why kind of change that formula? I'm going to talk a little bit about the point structure and then we can give our thoughts on the point structure. So again, it's 8 down to 1. So if you finish in first, you get 8 and then it scales down 1 point at a time down to 1 point. That's a lot of points.
Yeah, it's a bit dramatic.
That's a lot. Because, I mean, you've got to get top 7 or so to get 8 points in a regular race?
Right.
So something like that. So it's a ton, and it's big implications. Now, again, for those teams that are down at the bottom, if you're a Haas or a Williams or AlphaTauri, this is a good opportunity to make up some points. But if you're those top teams competing, if you have one bad sprint race, you're now suddenly in a much worse position than you would have been if it had just been the races. My thought on this is twofold. Well, threefold. One, get rid of the sprint races. That's option 1. Option 2 would be to go back to how it was last year, where the sprint races were the qualifying for the actual race. I thought, if nothing else, that tied the two events together and it didn't feel like it was pointless points, right?
Sure.
It wasn't just, we're going to award 8 points because we have this third distance race. It was, okay, we're going to award points because you did well and this is your qualifying order, so there is incentives there. Or if you don't want to do that, you want to keep the sprint shootout and the sprint as a completely different day on Saturday, fine. Scale back the points, only the top 3, and you go 3, 2, 1.
Okay.
It's way less significant than 8.
As far as points wise, I think I would agree with you on that. Maybe only give the podium people points and make it way less points than what we actually are seeing now with the 8 points difference. But in terms of the structure and how these things goes, point 1, get rid of the sprint races. I'm going to agree with you on that one. Point 2, where you said to go back to how it was last year, where the qualifying matters for how it actually goes for the feature race. Dump that idea. That's terrible. That was a horrible idea. It was a bad idea last year. It would be bad going forward. I think what we need to do is go with what Carlos Sainz and a few other drivers are saying and ditch sprint shootout altogether so that we have practice 2. We get 2 practice sessions instead of just 1, and it's par ferme for the rest of the weekend. And instead, you get 2 practice sessions. Give me a sprint race in the reverse driver standings order.
Wow.
So whoever's leading, if it's Max Verstappen that's leading the driver standings currently in that moment, put him in 20th. I want to see him fight his way all the way up to the top. In terms of, like, if you're Logan Sargent and you're at the very, very bottom of this whole thing, you got 0 points, say, put him in first. Put him in first. I want to see what happens. I want to see if he's able to hold on, maybe get 7th. But if we're going to do it that way, keep the points how they are, 8-1. Because then, for drivers like Logan Sargent who start on pole because they're in dead last, those 8-1 points matter. Because if he finishes in 7th, that's 2 points right there.
It's an interesting topic. I don't know if I agree with it, and I know why they would never do it. It's too dangerous because you're going to have way more overtakes in that situation than any other event.
Here's where I disagree.
Because you're scaling them worst to best.
Here's where I disagree with you. You can say that it's too dangerous, but then you have to remind yourself, these are the best 20 drivers in the world in terms of single-seater circuit racing.
But the second a top 10 team has their car explode because they're trying to overtake 20th Logan Sargent in a sprint race, they're not going to be happy about that.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, aren't you doing it for views? You're trying to get more attention drawn to the sport of Formula One. And if you don't want it to be an exact replica of what we're going to see in the future race, change it up. Make it something that's almost kind of, it would be even more of a circus act. I get that aspect of it, but I would almost want to see that more. I would want to see the Logan Sargents hold on to first and then probably end up somewhere around 8th, 9th, or 7th or 8th, and they're getting 1 or 2 points. I want to see Max Verstappen go from 20th to whatever he ends up in. I doubt he'll be able to go 20th to first and a third of the distance or whatever this sprint race is. But I want to see a giant mix-up just like that.
Okay. I still think they should just get rid of them, though, honestly.
I mean, we're on the same page with that one. Get rid of them.
So we looked at the point structure. We looked at how it impacted 2023. The weekend structures on these is odd. And if you're not, like, obsessed with Formula One, you might only be watching the Grand Prix. You might have only watched qualifying, something to that effect. And so what happens is that these really throw off the teams because, again, you really only get one practice session.
That's it.
Then you get qualifying for the Grand Prix
on Sunday. And we're talking about qualifying on Friday night or whatever.
Yeah, it is on Friday. And then you have the sprint shootout and then the sprint race all on Saturday.
That's all your Saturday events.
Nothing having to do with the Grand Prix practice or qualifying on Saturday. You forget the Grand Prix even exists on Saturday, which to me seems like a mental kind of roadblock for the drivers. It probably doesn't impact them that much, but think about it. You go a whole day without thinking about the whole reason you're there. That's a lot. And then Sunday you go into the Grand Prix. We've had our questions on Parc Fermé. I don't really know if they've been answered fully, but essentially the car is locked in at the time of the sprint, right?
It's locked
in.
Or
the qualifying from Friday.
Right, so there.
That is so little time to prep your car.
That's why I'm saying ditch the sprint shootout and make it to where you have a locked set grid lineup for the actual sprint race. Therefore, you get another practice session. But while we're on the topic of weekend structure, I got a couple thoughts on that too. If you're going to keep everything the exact same, fine. One practice session, qualifying, sprint shootout, sprint race, feature race. Change it up. I need to see practice 1, then I need to see sprint shootout as the second Friday event. Then give me the sprint race or qualifying for Saturday, and then the other one in its other spot. So flip those if you need to, however you want to put that. And then the feature race on Sunday. what I essentially really want to see is I want to see practice session, and then I want to see sprint shootout. Again, give me Saturday, give me the sprint race straight into qualifying. Because then the drivers are qualifying for the very next event, which is how it should be. Qualifying event. Not qualifying something that has nothing to do with the race on Sunday, something that has nothing to do with the race on Sunday, and then event. That makes zero sense to me.
So we had 6 sprints this year, and we also have 6 sprints for next year. Let me qualify that with there are 6 scheduled sprints. One of them is in China, so who knows if that'll happen, as we've been teased for 4 seasons in a row now with the China race. Man. We had 6 races. Now they went up from 3, right? They started with 3. I can't remember. Did they have a season where they did like 1 as a pilot? I can't remember.
No, I believe the one with 3 was the very first.
The very first one. So they went from 3 to 6. My only hope is that they don't keep scaling this up. I don't see this as sustainable for having this every single weekend.
It better not be every single weekend, because if we have to sit here and watch 22, 23 different sprint races throughout the entirety of the season, that's too much. And like I said, with all the problems that we already listed on how it's basically giving you exactly what you're going to see on Sunday, so there's no surprises. That means no surprises for 23 races the entirety of the season. That means actually, that would be way bigger championship implications, though.
Huge.
Massive implications.
Especially if they go with your idea of having it 20 down to 1 as the starting.
I want to see it. I'm still standing on that.
You're giving Logan Sargent or Liam Lawson or whoever has to be last every single race weekend they're lining up first.
Well, think about this. If Logan Sargent's getting 1 or 2 points because he's ending in 7th or 8th, we keep saying Logan Sargent. It's just because that's what it is.
That's what it is this year.
It's not. It might not be. Say it's Joe Guan Yu. Say it's input whoever's going to be at the bottom of the track here or the bottom of the grid this time. But if we do it for every single race, then they're picking up those 7th and 8th place finishes, getting 1 or 2 points. Then it's not always going to be them at the bottom. So now you have a bigger fight for the bottom of the championship.
I think if you do that, you've got to scale down the points to a 3-2-1 thing.
But then it doesn't matter, because there's no way a Logan Sargent will hold on to first.
Right, but it can't matter that much.
If it can't matter, then just take out the sprint races, which is also what we're saying.
Okay, so in 2023, we had these tracks as our sprints. We had Azerbaijan or Baku. We had Austria, the Red Bull Ring. We had Spa, which is Belgium. Qatar, the kind of newcomer. It's been here before, but it came back.
Camel racing.
We had USA and COTA down in Austin, and then we had Brazil or Sao Paulo. Overall, I think they did a half decent job this year of picking the tracks, but I have a couple of changes I would make.
Okay.
So I'm going to keep 3. I'm going to keep Azerbaijan, I'm going to keep Austria, and I'm going to keep Sao Paulo. Here's why. Azerbaijan, speed and overtakes. It's a great track for it. We're talking action-packed. Sure. Austria, the same reason. It's a short track, so the sprint race is actually a longer distance lap-wise, a lot of speed, a lot of overtakes. The only caveat I have to that is, especially in the past 2 seasons, we've seen a lot of the black and white flag and eliminated track times at Austria, because the marshals the stewards have really cracked down on that. They got to fix that issue, because that really ruins a lot of the atmosphere. And then let me keep Sao Paulo again because of that overtaking that it has. These are action-packed tracks, which is what I'm looking for. I'm going to toss out Spa, I'm tossing out Qatar, and I'm tossing out COTA. Spa's too classic, and it already has enough hype. It's Spa, it's Belgium, it's Eau Rouge, it's Rayon.
Okay.
It doesn't need the sprint race to bring it more attention. Tossing out Qatar because it's too infrequent, it's too new.
Get rid of it.
It wasn't a very good race this year, either the race or the sprint. It wasn't enjoyable. And then again, kind of like Spa, I think USA has enough hype. That's been the United States Grand Prix for 11, 12, 13 years now, whatever it's been. You have 450,000 people on a race weekend. Give the U.S. the classic F1 experience. Don't trick it up, right? It just doesn't need that.
Okay.
Here's what I'm going to add. Give me France. Only reason, France is kind of a dull weekend, but it's right there in the heart of Europe. They have a lot of visitors,
It's a lot of overtakes.
It's a lot of overtakes. It's a quick track, but let's spice it up a little bit, right? All the drivers complain that France is a parking lot. You know, the viewership might not be as enthusiastic about it. Trick it up. Give it a sprint race to add some hype to it. See if that works. Give me Japan. Another great overtaking track. The weekend in attendance is a little bit lower there because if you're not familiar with Suzuka, it's a little ways out from any of the major cities in Japan. I'm not going to say it's out in the country, but it's also not in a major metropolitan area. Trick it up. Get some more viewers, get some more attendance. And then finally, give me my favorite race, which is a bold statement for me saying to mess up my favorite race. Give me Jeddah. I want 20 insanely fast, high-flying, chaotic laps around the Jeddah Corniche circuit. I want slapping walls. I want accidents. I want crazy. And think about this. If you qualify first, it's a narrow track. It's a custom-built street circuit for racing, if you will. You're not going to have a lot of overtakes, but you're going to have a lot of chaos. You're going to have people, like I said, crash out. You're going to have people get damage on their wings, their front wings. You're going to have them lose tires, slamming into walls. The points are going to be divvied up way more wildly than any other race. So give me, like I said, in total, give me Azerbaijan, Austria, give me, France, Jeddah, Japan, and Sao Paulo.
Okay, that's your 6.
Yeah, what do you think?
I like it. I have a lot of the same ones.
Oh, no.
But I also have some different ones.
Okay.
Or a different one, rather. That's okay.
Wait, 5 out of 6.
So I like a lot of what they already had. Give me Sao Paulo, Brazil. I love the track in terms of the overtakes, the speed. It's a lot of action, especially for a sprint race because of the fact that it is going to be a shorter race. We need a lot of overtakes. Pretty much all 6 of these are going to line up on like the most overtakes, most tracks with the most overtakes. Like that's kind of what my whole purpose was.
Can I add one thing? Do you have Bahrain on your list?
I almost put Bahrain on there, and I'm gonna tell you why.
Why'd you leave it off?
I left it off because it's the first race of the season.
Exactly.
And that's the only reason.
And you can't take away the practice sessions on the first race of the season. You can't take away the
practice sessions, but also the ambiance of this is it. This is the race. Because, like I said, when you're talking about the Sunday being the feature race, you already get a little spiel of it when you do a sprint race on Saturday.
Right.
So you're taking away from the ambiance, the gravitas, give it, whatever you want to call it, for that Sunday race. So I want the season opener to be left alone, but I saw Bahrain on that list, and I almost added it.
Yep.
So, I'm going to keep COTA on there. I like COTA being a sprint race. First of all, I don't like sprint races. Let's just make sure that still stays out there because that's the whole purpose behind this episode. But if there are going to be, give me COTA. A lot of overtakes, a lot of speed, a lot of drama, especially in that turn 1 hairpin.
So let me ask you.
Okay.
We end up going to COTA 2024.
Right.
You really want to see a sprint race there?
No. I don't want to see sprint races, period. We already covered that.
Well, guess what? You are, because they're having one next year.
And I'm fine with that. We're going to get the weekend pass. We're going to see the whole dang thing. We're going to every practice session, sprint race, sprint shootout, qualifying, feature race, everything.
One practice session.
Practice session. So give me Azerbaijan. I love Azerbaijan for the long straight, kind of the same reason that Sao Paulo with that long straight that leads to the start finish. A lot of overtaking happens in Azerbaijan with the DRS sections. And then the whole dynamic of Azerbaijan is crazy too, just because it has these long straights and then boom, 90-degree turn, long straight, boom, 90-degrry turn. I mean, and then you have that whole castle section where you have to be very flimsy and you have to kind of maneuver your way through there, and then it's long straights. Like I love that. It mixes it up well.
Similar to how we saw in Vegas this year, the run up at turn 1, so off the line in Baku, turn 1 is pretty quick.
Yes.
So, 100 meters or so, 50. I don't know how long it is, but it's not very long. And so if you have a George Russell in 4th or something and he's all aggressive like he is at turn 1, you're talking about, possibly 4, 5, 6, 7 getting jumbled right off the start. Now you've only got 16, 17 laps to make that up, not 60 laps to make that up. Right.
So I gave you Sao Paulo, I gave you COTA, and I gave you Azerbaijan. Give me France. Yeah. I like that you had that. I had that as well. France, there's a lot of overtakes. It's one of the tracks with the most overtakes, and I liked France. I mean, as far as it's not really more of a speed-built track, but I also like the fact that there's a whole bunch of runoff. So whenever you have a sprint race, everybody's going to be aggressive because they're trying to make up as many positions as possible, as quick as they possibly can, because there's not a lot of laps.
Right.
So whenever you have all this runoff, if you do get shoved off, you just go flying off and come right back on. It's no big deal. No harm, no foul, no walls. Right? So
Can I make one suggestion for France too?
okay.
Change the track layout.
Ooh. Why? To what?
For the fun of, you know how they have that little section where they cone it off or whatever for the actual feature race?
Right.
Change it.
I mean, you could. Why not?
Where didn't like Lance Stroll go off the wrong way?
Yeah. Why not?
Do his path.
Like I said, we have a lot of similarities on our list. I also have Suzuka on this list. I really like Suzuka for the same reason that all of these are. It's an overtaking track. And I like Suzuka. There's a lot of speed, especially as you go into 130R where it's that long turn where you're flat out the entire time. Love it. I love Suzuka. Here's one you didn't have on your list. Give me the Netherlands. Hello.
You know, I thought about it.
Most overtakes ever in an F1 race. Period. Ever of all time.
I don't know if Zandvoort gets enough credit as possibly being one of the most chaotic tracks because you do have the overtakes, you have the banked turns, you have sand, you have potential flares on track. It's a chaotic race every single year, and if we are talking about having an exciting sprint race, something to watch, that could be up there for sure.
The Netherlands race this year saw 870 overtakes in a full feature race. You're telling me we're not going to get 300 of those bad boys in a sprint race? I want to see it.
Didn't we talk about that? Wasn't that the record or
That's
so?
what I just said. The most overtakes in F1 history.
That's
the Netherlands.
insane.
Give me a sprint race there. I want to see it. Because 870 in a full feature race, sprint race, you're going to get a third of those. I'm fine with seeing about 300 of them, 200 of them.
That's an insane number. Are you sure that's just for last year?
I mean, I could be wrong. This might be. Oh no, that is an insane number. That's way too high.
Yeah.
Okay,
it's
so
like 130.
That article, it was like 130 something. That number, that article was wrong. That article was as of from 2017 and on.
Yeah.
So but it's putting it up there as one of the most overtakes tracks.
I was like, there's 20 drivers.
I started doing the math as I was saying it too, and I was thinking because when I saw your face, I went, "Oh, that is wrong."
I was like, 800.
We got to roll with it. We got to roll with it.
Is it two drivers just constantly?
So then the actual number, let me see if I can pull it up here before we move on. I want to... Point is, while you're looking up that number, because I know you're looking it up for us, I think it was like 137. I could be wrong on that. When you give me an actual number, that'll be great. But even if
186.
Jeez, 186. So if we even see a third of that, you're looking at 60 overtakes in a sprint race. That's a lot of overtaking.
That's more than Monaco has in the past 20 years combined. Maybe sans Pierre Gasly.
Maybe we should put a sprint race in Monaco.
No.
That'd be the worst. See the exact same thing we'd see in the feature race. No overtaking.
The absolute worst.
So give me the Netherlands. That rounds out my list. I want to see it. Most overtakes in an F1 race ever. So make it a sprint race. Let's see a third of those overtakes in a short little third of a race. Give me the Netherlands, Sao Paulo, Coda, Azerbaijan, France, and Suzuka.
Okay, so let's wrap this up. Again, we'll go back to our thoughts. We talked about this a little bit at the start with how it had an impact on 2023. Just as a refresher, Mercedes and Ferrari came down to a final battle that really wouldn't have been as grandiose of a final battle if you take the sprint race out. On the flip side of that, you had the McLaren and Aston Martin battle, which again, it didn't really look like one, but if you take out the sprint races, they're tied.
Right.
Which that blows my mind more than the Mercedes and Ferrari thing by so much, because you look at
it's exactly 22. That's hilarious.
You look at the back half of the season, and Aston Martin was so far below McLaren, like perception, right? But to think if you just didn't have sprint races, something that didn't exist 2 or 3 seasons ago, they're tied. Aston Martin ties for 4th in the constructor standings after finishing, 7th or 8th last year?
Right.
That's a ridiculous jump up. And they're already, more than double what Alpine's points are. So you're talking about, McLaren, Aston Martin finishing in the 280 range, 290 range for points. That's an incredible season.
Right.
And now it gets overshadowed by finishing kind of fifth or sixth, whatever.
So here's another thing. I did want to make sure that this gets mentioned as well. Alonso had 8 points from his sprint races. Okay? Keep in mind, Alonso locked down 4th. Charles Leclerc locks down 5th with the exact same points as Alonso, but they gave it to Alonso because he had more podium finishes.
Yeah.
And then right below them, 1 point away, was Lando Norris. Now, I'm going to tell you why this is important. Alonso gets 8 points in the sprint races combined. Charles Leclerc picks up, what is that? He picks up 21 points. Okay?
Okay.
Lando Norris picks up 21 points. So if it wasn't for the sprint races, they wouldn't have even had a shot at possibly getting Alonso.
That's that I don't know if that beats the McLaren Aston Martin argument. It might, but if you look at the driver's standings for the end of the year, 4 through 7 goes 206, 206, 205, 200. The 48 some odd points that are potentially up for grabs for a driver through the 6 sprint races all comes down to a 6-point gap for 4 places in the driver standings. That's massive.
That's when the sprint races matter.
They really do. Especially like Carlos Sainz, who finishes at 200 points and arguably had 90% of a better season than Charles Leclerc until the very end.
I didn't even think about Carlos Sainz with that getting that even 200 right below Lando. He finishes with right in there that same amount. He finishes with 22 points.
Right.
So when you're looking at him, I mean, you're looking at Leclerc, Norris, and Sainz. The only reason why they finished right behind Alonso, these sprint races.
You win 2 or 3 of these things, and you're talking about moving up 4 spots in the driver standings.
That's too much implication. I don't like it. Dump them.
I don't know what the financial impact is there, but it's a lot. Millions of dollars of difference going into these. Again, we've made our case, I think, for getting rid of them. There's too many points on the line. They mess up the weekend structure. They mess up Part Ferme. They mess up the drivers. I haven't heard a single F1 fan talk positively about the sprint races. And we listen to a lot of F1 content outside of F1 broadcast that is trying to get more
people,
viewership.
yeah.
Like if you're listening to, non-biased people that are just fans of the sport, kind of like we are, or some other podcasts that are out there, everyone just kind of doesn't understand why they're there. And I have to agree with that because, again, this isn't NASCAR. You're not losing viewers. I would understand it if viewership tanked and Drive to Survive was over and you've got to find some way of keeping people engaged. But you don't. You're Formula One. You have 400,000 people every single race.
You have a
there.
Netflix show.
Again, I could see it if Drive to Survive ends, which it will at some point. It's not
Right.
going to be forever.
No.
Okay, trick it up at that point. But now what do? Drive to Survive ends, your weekend attendance dips from an average of 280,000 across the whole season to 200,000 or 100,000. What's the next level of tricking it up? Like, how far do we get from the roots of Formula One? Because I know that what we're watching in 2018 isn't the original Formula One, right? It's vastly different. But it still feels like it's just, I practice, I qualify, I race. Now it's, I practice, I qualify, and then I qualify again, and then I race, and then I race again. And it doesn't make any sense. So let us know in the comments what your thoughts were on the 2023 sprints. We would love to hear your feedback.
Guys, if you think I need to go back to school for basic math, I think I would agree with you.
All right, guys, we'll see you.
Bye, guys.